The plane hadn't even taken off, and already something felt wrong. A man in 2A was being stared at, not because he was loud, not because he caused a scene. He simply existed, in the wrong skin, in the wrong seat. A white flight attendant walked down the aisle with fake composure. She wasn't smiling with her eyes, just her mouth. When she stopped, she didn't say his name. She said, "Sir, we'll need you to relocate." That was all. No explanation, no apology, no discussion. He looked up, slowly, calm, unbothered. The red beret on his lap was barely visible beneath his hoodie, and with a soft voice he asked, "Why me?" But the answer wasn't coming, because the answer had nothing to do with ticketing, nothing to do with protocol. It had everything to do with assumption. A few rows behind, a French CEO checked his watch, still waiting to be seated, still waiting to be prioritized, because someone had told him that seat 2A might be available, but it wasn't. It was already occupied by a man no one had truly seen yet. So before we show you what happened next, tell us, where are you watching from? Because this story is no longer about just one country, it's about all of us. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly who that man was and why the whole plane fell completely silent. The morning sky over Paris was heavy with mist, the kind that dims gold and swallows noise. At gate 37, a man waited quietly. No entourage, no flashing security, no designer suit, just a hoodie, a duffel bag, and a red beret tucked under his arm like an afterthought. Most people didn't look twice. He liked it that way. The boarding screen flashed, Republic Jet 754 to Ouagadougou final call. He moved with purpose, not arrogance, like a man who didn't need attention to command it. And when he greeted the gate agent in French, it was with warmth. "Bonjour, ça va?" She smiled politely, scanned his pass, and waved him through. She had no idea who he really was. He entered the cabin like anyone else, nodded at the flight crew, took his seat, 2A, business class window, quiet, present, watchful. Behind him, the noise was starting to build. A man with a trimmed beard, polished shoes, and a European accent was not happy. He wasn't used to being told no. The gate agent had just informed him, "All business class seats are full, monsieur." That didn't sit well, because he was no ordinary passenger. He was the CEO of a multinational energy giant, one with operations all over West Africa, one who thought he owned the continent. His voice rose, just slightly, just enough to remind them who he thought he was. "I fund development in Burkina Faso. I should not be told to sit in coach." Airline staff scrambled, checked manifests, whispered behind iPads, and then someone mentioned the name 2A. A flag went up. They saw a name they didn't recognize, and an assumption was made. Maybe the black man in that seat didn't belong. They sent someone, Claire, a senior flight attendant with 15 years on the job, blonde, immaculate, sharp. She walked the aisle like it was a runway, scanning, judging, calculating, and then she saw him. C2A hoodie, no assistant, no expensive luggage. Her smile tightened. She leaned to another attendant and whispered, "Probably a mistake." She approached slowly, smiled coldly. "Monsieur, may I see your boarding pass?" He looked up, eyes calm, voice steady, handed it to her. She checked. The seat matched, but still, something in her resisted. "We may need to move you to accommodate another guest," she said. He didn't react, just blinked once, slowly. "Why me?" Her smile didn't break, but her tone did. "Just a small adjustment, monsieur. Operational reasons." He studied her face for a beat longer. Then he nodded, and without a word, he stood up, picked up his bag, picked up the red beret, and walked toward economy class. No protest, no sarcasm, just grace. Behind him, two passengers exchanged glances. A nurse, returning from a medical mission in Bobo Dioulasso, turned to her neighbor. Her voice was low, almost reverent. "That's not just a passenger." She paused, then added, "That's President Ibrahim Traoré, the man who had just been removed from seat 2A, was the president of Burkina Faso." The man in the red beret now sat in 32F, near the back of the aircraft. Tray table scratched, seat reclined stiff, and yet he said nothing. He simply rested the red beret on his lap and waited. At the front, Claire returned to her colleagues with an invisible smirk, one that said, "Fixed it." Her job was done. Her flight was now back on track. The CEO was escorted onto the plane like royalty. 2 assistants rolled his luggage. Claire greeted him with a bow of the head and a glass of champagne. "We've taken care of it, monsieur," she said with a polished smile. The CEO didn't ask how, didn't ask who had been moved. He simply took his seat in 2A, as if it had always been his. Several passengers watched the switch happen. One woman tilted her head, sensing something off, but no one said a word. The nurse from earlier clenched her jaw. Her neighbor whispered, "Do you think he knows?" She nodded once. "He knows. That's the dangerous kind of quiet." Mid-flight, Claire returned to the front. She hovered around 2A, refilling drinks, laughing at the CEO's jokes, leaning in too far. "So, how often do you visit Africa?" she asked. "Often," he said, sipping slowly. "We bring order to chaos, you know." Claire laughed, a sharp, performative kind of laugh. In the back, Traoré remained still. One hand rested on the armrest. One thumb gently brushed the edge of the red beret on his lap. His eyes were open, but not focused on anything inside the cabin. He was watching something else, a pattern playing out. Not for the first time, but maybe for the last. Another flight attendant passed by his seat. She paused. "Sir, would you like something to drink?" "Water is fine." She brought it with a short nod, no smile, no words. He took it quietly. In the cockpit, Claire made a second report. The seating's settled. Everything's running smoothly. The captain didn't ask questions, just nodded, but someone else was listening. A junior attendant, new, still learning. She had seen the switch, seen the badge when the man in the hoodie handed over his boarding pass. And now, she was looking him up on her phone. She didn't say anything, but her eyes widened slowly. The nurse in row 34 was watching too. She hadn't looked away once. The insult, the dismissal, the silence. It was too familiar, too sharp. She whispered again, this time not to her neighbor, but almost to herself. If only they knew. 2 hours into the flight, the lights dimmed. Passengers settled in. The hum of the aircraft filled the silence. The CEO snored softly in 2A, a folded blanket on his chest, champagne glass empty. Claire checked on him one last time, adjusted his blanket like a mother tending to a child. The hum of the aircraft softened. Lights dimmed to a muted blue. Somewhere, a baby cried. A man cleared his throat, but near the front, the tension was thickening. Something unseen was coming. One of the junior flight attendants walked toward the cockpit. She leaned toward the pilot's side window to peek, and then she froze. Her hand, resting on the wall, began to tremble slightly. "Claire," she whispered, voice barely audible. Claire didn't look up from her clipboard. "What is it now?" "You need to see this." Claire joined her at the front window. Her eyes squinted against the glare of the rising sun. Rows of black SUVs, dozens of them, lined like teeth. Military trucks, presidential flags, armed guards standing shoulder to shoulder. Their boots shone in the heat. Their rifles didn't move. They weren't just waiting for someone. They were guarding someone. Claire blinked. Her voice cracked just slightly. "What? Who is this for?" The younger attendant swallowed hard. "This doesn't look like just a VIP." In row 32F, the man with the red beret shifted slightly. not toward the window, not toward the aisle, but upward, like someone feeling something shift in the air. In the front cabin, a businessman asked, "Is this normal?" Another responded, "I see soldiers. Are we landing into a war zone?" Claire forced a smile. "It's probably a government event, maybe some ambassador." But even she didn't believe what she was saying. Then a small twist. A third flight attendant, the youngest of the crew, barely 23, tapped Claire's arm. She was holding a phone. Her hands were shaking. "Claire, I think you need to see who was sitting in 2A. Claire looked at her coldly. "What?" The young attendant flipped the screen around. A photo, a profile, a name, Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. Claire's throat dried instantly. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Her eyes shot to seat 2A. The CEO snored softly, oblivious. Then her gaze followed the aisle, back and back, to seat 32F. The man in the hoodie, the man she had moved, still calm, still quiet, still watching. The plane began its descent. Landing gear engaged. But now, every heartbeat in that cabin felt louder than the engines. The air had changed. The balance had shifted. Something sacred was unfolding, and Claire was no longer in control. The nurse in row 34 smiled again, but this time her eyes watered. "Now they'll see," she whispered. "They'll all see." The wheels touched down on Burkina Faso soil like a warning shot. Not loud, not violent, just undeniable. The aircraft rolled slowly toward the terminal, but out the windows, the view was anything but normal. Passengers pressed their faces to the glass, mouths open, eyes wide. Uniformed guards in formation, black SUVs idling with engines rumbling low, men in suits, medals, sunglasses that didn't blink, and behind them, a small crowd, not paparazzi, not protesters, citizens, holding small flags, cheering for someone. In business class, the CEO adjusted his tie. He smoothed his blazer, preparing for his grand exit. "Told you I was important," he muttered to Claire with a half smile. Claire didn't respond. She was too busy not breathing. The seatbelt sign dinged. Before anyone could rise, the main cabin door clicked open from the outside, and in stepped a man in a black beret and all-black uniform, flanked by 2 elite officers. His steps were deliberate, slow. Each one echoed down the aisle like thunder. He passed row 10, then row 20, not looking at passengers, not saying a word. And then he stopped at seat 32F. The man in the hoodie looked up, not surprised, not tense, just ready. The officer brought his hand up, not to wave, not to grab, but to salute. A crisp, sharp, full military salute, the kind reserved only for heads of state. The cabin went dead silent. You could hear hearts dropping like bags on the tarmac. The officer's voice was loud, but not aggressive. It didn't need volume. It had weight. "Mr. President, welcome home." Claire's legs gave way slightly. She gripped the wall of the galley to keep herself standing. The CEO's mouth parted, but no sound came. Traoré stood. No rush, no dramatics, just presence. He nodded to the officer, then glanced calmly toward the front of the plane. His eyes met Claire's, for the first time since she moved him, and she couldn't hold his gaze. Her eyes dropped, her hands trembled, her voice tried to rise, but no sound followed. The CEO looked around, saw the flags, the convoy, the military. Then he turned back to seat 2A, his seat, and finally understood what had just happened. President? He stammered. Traoré didn't respond. He didn't need to. Another officer stepped forward, this one younger, but just as commanding. He pulled a small folder from inside his jacket. He spoke to Claire and the CEO, but didn't call them by name. "By order of the Ministry of Justice, you are both required to exit the aircraft for immediate questioning related to the public disrespect and attempted demotion of a sovereign head of state." Claire's knees buckled. I didn't know," she whispered. I was just doing my job. The officer's reply was cold. You didn't need to know who he was. You just needed to treat him like a human being. The nurse in row 34 closed her eyes and whispered, "That's what justice looks like." As Traore stepped into the sunlight, the crowd outside erupted. Flags waved, children shouted, elders wept. And the man in the red beret, he didn't wave, he didn't gloat. He just walked, quiet, strong, complete. The heat on the tarmac wrapped around Claire like a punishment. Her once flawless uniform now clung to her skin. Her steps, once full of power, now shuffled with shame. She kept looking back at the plane, hoping, praying that someone would call this off, but no one did. The CEO followed beside her, still trying to make phone calls. "This is a mistake," he kept muttering. "You can't treat me like this. I know people in the ministry." But the officers didn't reply. They walked in silence, the silence of power being reclaimed. Cameras clicked in the distance, journalists whispered, cell phones recorded, and somewhere beyond the gate, on every African social media feed, a storm had already begun. They tried to remove the president of Burkina Faso from a plane seat he paid for. Republic Jet explained this. This is what colonial residue looks like. Hashtags exploded across the continent. Respect Africa, Traore, did not flinch, did your red beret, silence, make room for dignity, inside the Ministry of Justice. Claire and the CEO were separated for questioning. A translator was brought in for the CEO, but it didn't help. He couldn't explain away the arrogance. He couldn't unsay the things he said, not with video evidence. Claire, shaken, tried to apologize. "I didn't mean to disrespect him. I didn't know who he was." The investigator across the table didn't raise her voice. She simply said, "You didn't need to know who he was. You just needed to treat him like everyone else." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but the damage was done. By nightfall, the incident had reached every major news outlet in Africa. SABC News, Channels TV Nigeria, Global Continental News with a tight-lipped segment, World Current Affairs, TV, the Red Beret Incident. Republic Jet released a statement 16 hours later. It was cold, corporate, empty. "We apologize for any inconvenience or misunderstanding." But Africans weren't having it. Social media erupted again. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is a mindset. Tell the world who he is, not just a passenger. We are watching. We are remembering." Protest hashtags turned into action. Students in Senegal marched to the foreign consulate. Youth in Nigeria shared solidarity videos. Diaspora communities in the US, UK, and Caribbean reposted it by the millions. And everywhere, one name rose louder than all the noise: Ibrahim Traoré. Meanwhile, at the presidential palace, Traoré didn't hold a press conference. He didn't make a dramatic statement. He went back to work, reviewing documents, meeting with young leaders, visiting construction sites, building a nation, not a spectacle. But when a reporter caught him briefly outside a rural youth program, she asked, "Mr. President, do you have a message for those who disrespected you?" He smiled, paused, and simply said, "No African is too small to be respected, and no position is too high to remember that." In the following weeks, Claire was dismissed from her post. The CEO resigned from his company amid international backlash. Republic Jet saw a massive dip in bookings from West Africa, and in Ouagadougou, murals began to appear. On the side of a market wall, someone painted, "He said nothing, but the world listened." Next to it, a red beret and a seat marked 2A. The nurse who witnessed everything on that flight gave an interview months later. She was asked, "Why didn't you say anything when they moved him?" She replied, "Because I knew who he was, and I knew that silence would do more damage than protest. I wanted the world to see how we're still treated. and how we now respond. The interviewer asked, "And what do you think President Traoré taught us that day?" She smiled. "That dignity doesn't shout, it lands, and when it does, everything changes." Some men are known for their speeches, others for their anger. But Ibrahim Traoré, he became legend by saying almost nothing at all. He didn't shout, he didn't demand. He moved when they told him to move, not because they were right, but because he didn't need a seat to know his worth. In a world where black men are told to prove themselves, to rise louder, stand taller, wear the crown bigger, he chose the opposite. He sat in economy and let the world realize, far too late, that they had asked a king to move. Across the continent, people whispered his name like a prayer, not just as Burkina Faso's president, but as their president, from Kenya, from Cameroon, from Harlem to Harare. That's our leader. That's what dignity looks like. That's the Africa we want. And maybe that's what this moment was never about. Not the seat, not the airline, not even the apology. Maybe it was about reminding a continent that dignity doesn't come from titles or uniforms. It comes from knowing who you are. Even when the world refuses to see it, he didn't raise his voice, but the entire world heard him.